There has been a lot of discussion about how the Old Republic is going to be the next big, massively multiplayer online RPG, and topple World of Warcraft from its throne. I've been listening to this talk for a while, and though I was initially excited by the prospect of BioWare making Knights of the Old Republic as a massively multiplayer online RPG, I now have strong doubts that the game will be as great as people are expecting it to be. To explain why, I've created this video. Now, there's a lot of stuff I could say, but I'm going to try to narrow my reasons down to just 5 bullet points. So here it is, the RPG Fanatic's top 5 reasons why Star Wars The Old Republic may not kill WoW. Reason number 5. The Old Republic ignores established Star Wars lore. It has been said that George Lucas is the only man in the world hated and loved by the exact same people. Star Wars fans love George Lucas for creating the world, but they hate him for every retcon he has allowed to that universe in his pursuit of the almighty dollar. The Old Republic, as many Star Wars video games tend to do, has several elements in it that retcon established lore about the world and its history. While there's a lot of examples I could give, I'm going to focus on just one. Double-bladed lightsabers, also called a lightsaber staff. Do you know what the nickname for a double-bladed lightsaber is within the Star Wars universe? A Sith lightsaber. Want to know why? Because only the Sith use them. In fact, if you ever read any of the original Tales of the Jedi comic books that established the Old Republic setting, which the Knights of the Republic video games are largely based on, you would know how deeply despised these weapons are by the Jedi. The Jedi Council frowned heavily on their use, and most of the Jedi who were bold enough to use them against the wishes of the Council end up turning to the dark side of the Force. So, knowing all of this, why the fuck are Jedi consulars using Sith model lightsabers in the Old Republic during the time period when these weapons were most despised by the Jedi Council? I'll tell you why. Because BioWare decided to make consulars into generic fantasy wizards, and wizards need wizard staffs. Then there is the problem of the Sith Inquisitioners having healing powers. While it is true that dark side users can heal, they can't do it like a light side user can. Dark side healing draws on the pain and anguish of other people to reinvigorate the Sith. For example, in the Darth Bane Path of Destruction, Darth Bane had to slaughter a farmer's family in order to heal himself from poisoning, but even that was only a temporary measure. Basically, BioWare is retconning the Star Wars franchise so that it better conforms to the stereotypes of the fantasy genre. I mean seriously, Sith who specialize in healing their teammates. What the fuck, BioWare? Where the hell did you ever get the idea any Sith specializes in using the Force to heal other people? I mean, okay, sure, heal themselves at times, alright, but heal other people? There is a much better way to handle this. The Old Republic does not need heal bots. In fact, I hate heal bots in massively multiplayer online RPGs. It is an archaic and stupid design. There are games out there like City of Heroes that have managed to find alternative mechanics so that a class devoted to heal bombing isn't needed. City of Heroes does it with regeneration buffs and a dodge mechanic, so that tanks simply don't get hit that much when properly buffed, leaving the defender to take part in the battle using offensive spells. Now, while I'm not saying that particular method should be used in the Old Republic, it sure would make a hell of a lot more sense than Sith running around healing their teammates. Reason number 4. The Old Republic does not use the Dungeons & Dragons system mechanics that made the original Knights of the Old Republic games so fun. All of the mechanics in the Knights of the Old Republic games were based off the mechanics in the Star Wars role-playing game released by Wizards of the Coast. It was heavily based on the D20 system, with novel mechanics like vitality and wounds. And the Force powers available to Force-sensitive characters were quite plentiful. For example, any Force-sensitive character could learn Force Lightning if they wanted to. It's just using it resulted in earning a dark side point, which is problematic for a Jedi. However, the Old Republic is not based in the Star Wars role-playing game. Instead, it is basically taking the character classes of World of Warcraft and trying to do Star Wars with them. This results in diminished character customization options, as whatever class you start the game as determines what class you'll be for the rest of that character's life. You can't multi-class like in the Knights of the Old Republic, and your dialogue tree choices won't decide if you join the Sith or the Republic. As in World of Warcraft, your faction is determined at character creation. Let me demonstrate what I mean with the diminished character customization with a little comparison. My Sith character in the Star Wars D20 game dual-wielded lightsabers, had Force Lightning, used some Force Illusion skills, had Force Choke, Force Speed, and Move Object. I could recreate this character in Knights of the Old Republic's video games, as the Knights of the Old Republic games just took the same mechanics and put them into a video game setting. By comparison, there is no character in the Old Republic who can do all these things. If you want to specialize in lightsaber combat as a Sith, you need to be a Sith warrior, which means you can't have Force Lightning because they don't learn that ability. If you want Force Lightning, you can't specialize in lightsaber combat because Sith Inquisitioners only specialize in Force Lightning and Sith healing. You are basically a mage who stands in the back and blasts people with lightning bolts, and tosses heals, and really uses their lightsaber in any effective way. I'm sorry, and I don't know any other way to put this, but that is fucking stupid. Not just stupid, but fucking stupid. I need to use an expletive to demonstrate how utterly stupid this really is. You see, the reason World of Warcraft mages don't specialize in melee weapons is because WoW's concept of the mage is based off Dungeons & Dragons. In the D&D universe, the reason mages are frail is because they spend years of their life memorizing spellbooks and don't really work out. They don't wield weapons often because to cast spells required concentration, and not something that can be done while engaged in a sword fight without specialized training. Mages also don't wear heavy armor because in Dungeons & Dragons, you need spell components like vials of dragon blood and pieces of string or whatever in order to cast spells, and when a mage wears armor, it interferes with their ability to quickly get those items out of their bag. No kidding, that is the game mechanic stated reasons for why mages don't wear heavy armor. Now, the Old Republic does not derive itself from Dungeons & Dragons. It is based in the Star Wars universe, which is composed of films, novels, comic books, and video games that have been produced for about 30 years. In the Star Wars universe, it is made quite clear that Sith and Jedi are all proficient in lightsaber combat as part of their training, and even those who specialize in offensive use of the Force, like Yoda and Emperor Palpatine, are total badasses with the lightsaber. Seriously, it makes no sense for Jedi Consulars and Sith Inquisitioners to be Dungeons & Dragons mages who predominantly use ranged attacks. Reason number 3. Historically, BioWare games are not polished enough to meet the expectations of today's massively multiplayer online RPG players. This is no longer 1998 where players will tolerate huge glitches in their subscription-based games. Today, having game-breaking bugs at launch will result in a massively multiplayer online RPG disenfranchising their players, leading to never being able to regain their trust in the product. This was proven with recent launches, such as Warhammer Online, Age of Conan, and Final Fantasy XIV. BioWare just doesn't have a solid reputation for releasing bug-free games, or even quickly fixing these bugs once they're discovered. 3 years after its release, and they still haven't fixed all the broken algorithms in Dragon Age Origins, such as those pertaining to healing bonuses. For example, abilities and items that award any bonuses to the amount of HP recovered by healing effects do nothing at all in Dragon Age Origins. Yes, they still do nothing. BioWare gets away with this crap in the single-player market because once players buy the game, it really doesn't matter. BioWare doesn't need to convince those players to keep playing the game for years and years in order for it to make money off the product, like they need to do with a massively multiplayer online RPG game. Reason number 2. Dialogue trees and voice acting everything makes it a lot harder to match World of Warcraft's content. Massively multiplayer online RPGs are not like a single-player game. MMORPGs live and die by the developer's ability to release a constant stream of new content in order to prevent players from becoming bored with the game. Dialogue tree-based quest chains take much longer to develop content for than linear quest chains because each dialogue tree quest has several different ways it can go, and all those different routes must have assets created for them, like art and scripting and rewards and so forth. And they also have to be tested too. So if you have a quest chain that has 4 different outcomes, it takes 4 times the amount of time and resources and effort to make that one quest than would be needed if you had simply made one outcome for the quest, like in World of Warcraft. But that's not a fair comparison either, because BioWare has insisted on voice acting every character in the game. That means they actually need more resources than a quest in World of Warcraft would take. So basically, what I'm saying is that for the Old Republic to rival World of Warcraft in content, they would need to make 4 times as much content as WoW currently has, and spend a lot more money making that content, because now they have voice acting expenses for all existing and new content for the entire lifespan of the game. Therefore, I have very strong doubts that BioWare will be able to match World of Warcraft in content volume. According to the WoW Wiki, WoW currently has 8,430 unique quests that players can perform. I know this because I spent a few hours counting them up, one by one. It is simply mind-boggling how much content World of Warcraft has, because Blizzard has constantly been developing new content for it since it launched in 2003, releasing new content every few months. It's not something a startup can just simply match, right off from the bat. Another way this can go is that the dialogue choices are largely meaningless and have very little impact on the way the narrative actually develops. In theory, this means the development time and resources needed to churn out quest content won't be significantly increased over World of Warcraft. However, this will result in players crying foul because they expect dialogue trees to alter the narrative of the game, even if it's just in a slightly cosmetic way as in Dragon Age Origins. If the Old Republic settles for making most quest dialogue choices have no actual impact on the storyline, then players will be disenfranchised because the game doesn't meet their expectations. I also think BioWare is overestimating the market value of a massively multiplayer online RPG having every quest include cutscenes with voice acting. In one of their recent demos, they show a party starting a quest, and it takes 4 minutes just to get through the cutscene before the players actually get to do any fighting. The average player doesn't have that kind of patience. They want to skip through the dialogue choices and get the show on the road. I mean, look at how it plays in Dragon Age. At certain points of the game, you can spend half an hour of gameplay with nothing but dialogue options as you talk to a whole village. Imagine that kind of experience in a massively multiplayer online RPG where people in your party may only have an hour or two to play that day. They want to raid and get some loot before they need to log off. They don't want to experience the story. In short, and in my opinion, I don't think the majority of players of massively multiplayer online RPGs care much about the world the designers made. All they care about is what they can do in that world and how their actions influence that world. Dialogue tree cutscenes that primarily influence what morality points they earn is not going to be enough to keep them interested, especially when those dialogue tree cutscenes become viewed as an obstacle to going out and killing some mobs for loot. Now I know there are some gamers out there who love these dialogue choices and have the patience to sit through and read everything or listen to all the voice bits, but I do not believe that this demographic consists of millions of people. City of Heroes tried to do the whole storyline is our best selling point route, and it didn't work out so well. A massively multiplayer online RPG needs gameplay that will entertain people for months and months. And while you can make the story into a game with dialogue trees, that kind of gameplay is ultimately a minigame, and the placement of this minigame, I think, is wrong because it prevents players from getting to the good parts of the game, the combat. Reason number 1. World of Warcraft is the king of quest-centric massively multiplayer online RPGs, and the Old Republic is trying to imitate WoW's quest-centric design in order to beat WoW. Age of Conan and Warhammer Online tried to do this before, and the same problem occurred both times. There wasn't enough content in their games to satisfy the expectations of modern MMORPG players. In both cases, players burned through the content faster than the developers expected them to, leaving the developers scrambling to come up with hasty, poorly tested content they then thrust into the game, which then only further damaged players' trust in the product and led them to return to WoW. I expect that Star Wars The Old Republic will be to WoW as the Chinese Rolex knockoff is to a real Rolex. It will resemble the original, but be of inferior quality. Remember, this will be the third massively multiplayer online RPG that EA has produced in the past few years. Their last fiasco being Warhammer Online, developed by Mythic, who I should remind you merged with BioWare back in 2009. Jeff Hickman and Paul Barnett, who were key designers on Warhammer Online, are now key designers on The Old Republic. Barnett is the creative director for BioWare, and Hickman is the executive producer. I really need to point this out. The same people responsible for making Knights of the Old Republic are not the only ones developing The Old Republic. There's former Warhammer Online people involved in it too. I don't point this information out because I think that they are terrible designers. I point this information out because their last mega million-dollar MMORPG that took years to develop crashed and burned because it didn't match the hype they personally said it would. Therefore, I find it very difficult to believe in the hype they are putting out about their new product, The Old Republic. Remember, Warhammer Online also took 3 years to develop, and it still turned out to be vastly inferior to World of Warcraft. I mean, it sold 1.3 million box copies at launch, but by 2009 had less than 300,000 players. Last February, EA shut down 3 of its servers due to lack of subscribers. This is not a good track record to have, and it's the only track record the Old Republic team has with massively multiplayer online RPGs. While it is true that on big projects like this, key decisions are not left up entirely to a few individuals, it is also true that egos flare huge in this industry. I have no idea what the corporate culture is like at BioWare, but if their previous titles and interviews released by their employees have taught me anything, they honestly believe they can do no wrong, and things like save data corrupting glitches are not that important to fix before a game is sold to consumers, and even then should not be fixed until a year after the game was released. This just isn't the kind of work ethic needed to successfully launch a massively multiplayer online RPG intended to beat WoW at their own game. BioWare seems to be just too focused on making a killer storyline. There is also the whole community aspect of a massively multiplayer online RPG. MMORPGs thrive on user interactions. There has to be a strong sense of community, and players need to be able to easily enter the existing communities. That is the whole purpose of guilds in massively multiplayer online RPGs, to help establish strong bonds between players, so they aren't just logging in to go fight a boss or get an epic piece of loot. They are logging in to fight bosses and get loot with their friends. WoW has a strong and well-developed community, and there are many aspects of it designed to develop that community in ways other MMORPGs simply don't try to do. This means BioWare needs to do more than just make it so your party can have dialogue tree conversations with NPCs during the cutscenes. The Old Republic needs to give players team-oriented goals they cannot already achieve in World of Warcraft, and so far I have not heard anything you can do in this game that you can't already do in World of Warcraft. And it's not that other games haven't tried to give these unique goals that are different than in WoW. For example, Age of Conan's big thing was the creation of guild towns and fighting other players for control of land. However, the execution was poor, the game was too buggy at launch, and the integration of a town creation element with PvP and the economy could have been a whole lot better. So simply having a novel idea isn't enough. The idea has to also be executed well. The majority of MMO players no longer have the patience to endure 10 or 20 patches that change how everything works as the design team plays with ideas. Even WoW is starting to have trouble in this area, as players become fed up with the numerous changes in Cataclysm, and that most of the new content in Cataclysm was aimed at levels 1 through 60, and not enough content was made for veteran players to retain their interest. Blizzard had the mistaken idea that veteran players want to play the whole fucking game all over again, and would love to roll a new character, when in reality most veteran players have already rolled several characters to top level, and don't want to do it just to play as a fucking werewolf or a goblin. Blizzard has noticed this, which is why lots of new content is rolling out for veterans now. And when you make a game to beat WoW, you are fighting a war of content. Who has more of it, who has more fun to play content, and most importantly, who has more content that actually fucking works the way it's supposed to. This is why every other contender who has tried to usurp WoW has failed. They simply cannot produce enough highly polished content to match Blizzard's beast of a game. And we must remember that World of Warcraft did not get to become the king because it had tons of polished content right out the door. At its original launch, it actually had less content than competitor EverQuest did. The thing is that the majority of EverQuest's content was shitty, unbalanced, and uninteresting compared to what WoW ultimately delivered. EverQuest was not a quest-centric game. Most of the time you sat around an overworld map waiting for respawning enemies to appear, aka spawn camp grinding. However, by using a quest-centric model that wasn't focused on spawn camping, WoW was able to beat EverQuest and steal the crown. It also helped that WoW was a significantly easier game to play, and there was interesting and unique mechanics between classes, like Warrior's Rage Meters and Rogue Combo Points. But really, the main reason WoW succeeded was its quest-centric design that gave players lots of goals to strive for besides kill 5,000 skeletons, then walk for an hour to another map to kill 5,000 orcs, and so on. And there was a real story as you performed your quest to level up that was just icing on the cake, and not really the focus of the game. Basically, BioWare has a much harder task than Blizzard did. Blizzard became king of the MMORPGs by taking advantage of the mistakes made by EverQuest's development team. By comparison, BioWare is trying to topple WoW when it's at its absolute best. That is not an easy fight to win, especially when it doesn't seem the Old Republic has anything incredibly novel to bring to the table. BioWare is trying to make the whole selling point of the Old Republic be that it is a quest-centric game with dialogue trees and voice acting for every line of text. However, in my personal opinion, that just doesn't sound unique enough from WoW's model, and their inclusion of voice acting and dialogue trees will actually be hindrances rather than a help on their quest to be the next WoW. You see, the reason games like Atlantica Online can penetrate the market is because they don't play anything like WoW. Although they are quest-centric, the game mechanics are very different. The Old Republic may not use the same damage algorithms, but it's still a Dick-U-Mud descendant just like WoW is. Dick-U-Mud being the game that inspired EverQuest, which inspired World of Warcraft, which itself inspired pretty much every WoW clone in the market today. And when I say nothing new to the table, I'm not talking about lightsabers and Jedi or the sci-fi setting. I'm talking about controlling a single character in a real-time combat system and clicking your mouse on someone to make your character auto-attack them, and then pressing a bunch of hotkey buttons to execute additional skills. That style of gameplay is 2 decades old, and unfortunately the overwhelming majority of massively multiplayer online RPGs play just like that. And then every character in the Old Republic conforms to a character class stereotype established by Dungeons & Dragons: Warrior, Rogue, Ranger, Cleric, and Wizard, just like the overwhelming majority of massively multiplayer online RPGs do. Seriously guys, this shit has been done to death, and I'm tired of playing Dungeons & Dragons, the online video game, in pretty much every MMORPG on the market. American football has more team position variety in it than Dungeons & Dragons does. BioWare, I know the overwhelming majority of your games are licensed D&D products, so that is what you had the most experience in creating. But please, get your shit together and come up with something that branches out from Papa Bear Gary Gygax a little more. it's safe to do so, and you can do so. You've got enough experience to do so. So do it! Update. While editing this video, BioWare announced crew skills, which basically allows the NPC mercenary characters you hire to do your item crafting and go perform missions for you. While this is a slightly different way to handle crafting, it's hardly the first time such a system has been seen in a game. For example, in 1991, the Magic Candle 2, the 440, allowed you to have party members work a job to earn you money and stay in one location to learn new skills. And in 1997, Final Fantasy Tactics allowed you to send units on missions to earn items and money for your army. Having experience with this already, I know that it's nice, I suppose, but it's hardly enough to really get me excited about the game. Personally, it sounds like a decent enough idea for MMORPG, but ultimately, it's just a minigame. The core gameplay of the Old Republic needs to be outstanding, and based on what I've seen so far, I'm just not seeing anything that hasn't already been done before in other games, and that I can personally get really excited about. In short, I could be wrong about this, but I probably am not.